Hi everyone! Today I'm having, surprise, surprise, yet another video about the vile fraud Beatrice Sparks. I'm continuing my recent unbroken streak of videos about this absolutely terrible person, infamous literary fraud. This is based off of a blog post which I have scheduled for August. It's like 30 reasons why I, hate Beatrice Sparks, but if I see the time is, like creeping up too long and I'm not even, halfway through yet, then I'm going to split it into two videos. Like why have like one video when you can have two videos about this horrible crank? And it's like really, I mean, she was a horrible person, and her like literary fraud had very serious, like horrible, like disgusting implications for many like innocent people. And it was just, unethical and sleazy and stuff to like lie to her intended audience and manipulate people and such. But, it's kind of like really funny to rip her apart. Each and every one of Dr. Fraud's books are absolute garbage, though a few are relatively stronger and better written than her horrible usual. I have to give her grudging credit for that one. She was also a terrible person. Now let's go through the specific reasons I hate, loathe, and despise this vile crank. Number one, the foremost reason for pretty much anyone who knows anything about this crank, she couldn't write worth crap. We all have to start somewhere, but Dr. Fraud was one of those people who failed to improve with time. As Rick Emerson points out, all her books read like first drafts, and I just finished rereading this wonderful book, Unmask Alice by Rick Emerson. I have a video about it from about 2 years ago or so, shortly after the book first came out. I really do highly recommend this book. There were so many things revealed in this, even I didn't know, and I've been researching this crank for many years. But I'm obviously going to get to them as well. But when Mr. Emerson says all her books read like first drafts, he also points out the like terrible, like awful quirks. For example, her fetish for writing in all caps, even entire sentences. Oh, and frequently all paragraphs. We all love the all caps, even though it's the equivalent of screaming, and the multiple exclamation points and the constant italics, and putting them all together, all caps in all italics with like 10 exclamation points, and just like slapping the suffix of ness on every other word, like exoticness, like overwhelmingness, like deliciousness, like delectableness, like horribleness, like, and just like so many terrible things. She was like a bad writer. I mean, I really don't know like if she had like writing classes or just been serious about improving her craft when working with an editor or crit partners or beta readers or something like that. If she would have gotten better, if she would have just been, oh, screw you, I do what I want, this is how I'm going to write, I'm not going to learn to modify my style because people have different sensibilities in the modern era. But like pretty much the number one reason I hate this woman is because she was a terrible garbage writer. I mean, well, I've ranted enough about that in previous videos about this crank. Number two, she got away with fairly minimal editing because she presented these books as real teen journals instead of fictional manuscripts. Each and every book needed radical rewrites, and it just makes me angry. Like any editor worth his or her salt would look at this and say, okay, this maybe it has potential, like the storyline and the topical thing could be relevant for like right now. For example, It Happened to Nancy about AIDS, or the Go Ask Alice about like drugs in the early 70s, or whatever other issues like eating disorders and like being sexually groomed by a teacher, or whatever other topics she was writing about, like teen and foster care, like ex-gangbanger, things like that. But we really need to like rework this because it's not written very well, and you have to have really good writing to rise above it. Or maybe they would have even sent her form rejections because it was just that like garbage. Number three, which is a horrible, egregious lie I found out from Unmask Alice, she lied to Avon Books about the CDC approving the medical content in It Happened to Nancy, which I'm currently doing a series about. The old fraud claimed the doctor's note must have gotten lost in the mail, then claimed in a later communication that everything had been approved. And this is gotten into in Mr. Emerson's book. I've bookmarked several pages where I'm going to be reading from. And I'm going to be reading from some of the other things later, but she's like saying, oh, it must have gotten lost in the mail. Everything has been approved. A doctor from the CDC is vetting the manuscript, making sure the AIDS information is correct, and it was not correct at all, and some of it was, outdated, even if it might have been correct at one point. I have a fairly recent video about particularly specifically the misinformation about HIV and AIDS. At least that's supposed to be happening. Sparks is the go-between. Yeah, what could go wrong with that one? And she says she already sent you the doctor's approval, but it never arrived. Maybe it got lost in delivery. You make a note to ask again. And then he goes on, there's a bigger, even weirder issue. There's a whole chunks of new material in the manuscript. Where did that come from? And she's not even answering. And then later in talking about, getting the endorsements from doctors who, surprise, surprise, later turned out to have been made up. And just like all the other alleged doctors endorsing her books, they all have stereotypically Jewish names. And that's knowing, Dr. Fraud, that it does not look good on her. It's basically an anti-Semitic stereotype. Oh, all Jews are doctors, and I'm just gonna make up the most stereotypical Jewish names I can for my fake doctors, and oh, no one will fact check them, even though searching Ancestry proves these doctors did not exist, or people by those names existed, but there was no way they could have been one and the same, because they lived decades before these doctors. They were just not doctors in their professional lives, and so she's making up these doctors with very vague generic titles, one of Nancy's doctors, psychiatrist working with AIDS specialist. Oh, that's specific. Again, with the vague titles, what does that mean? At least Sparks answered your question about the AIDS vetting, though it's a little terse. Everything is approved by the CDC. Oh, well, I guess that's that. That is just so non-specific. How could you get away with that? For example, I haven't been married before when I'm applying for the marriage license. Oh, I was divorced, but I'm not going to submit any proof of that my divorce is final, or maybe my spouse never legally even separated from me, or just other things. And then she lied about the PhD, and just why did these people never fact check? She just got away with claiming all this stuff that was not true, and they just took her at her word. That is just really embarrassing. Everyone was caught with their pants down enabling this crappy fraud for decades. Number 4, I consider the lies in Nancy particularly egregious, not just because it was the first Sparks book I ever read and was so badly hoodwinked by, but because HIV/AIDS misinformation is deadly and dangerous. Number 5, abstinence-only propaganda has been proven over and over again to not work and to have the exact opposite effect. Her constant pontificating about the automatic dire consequences of premarital sex, oh, you'll get knocked up, oh, you'll have to go on welfare, and welfare is terrible, and oh, you might need an abortion, and oh, that's a complete sin in the eyes of the Morador, and you'll get STDs and AIDS, and you'll be dead within 2 years, and oh, you will start down a path. You'll become one of the school whores passing AIDS around like M&Ms. That's so grotesquely offensive. I know I'm very old-fashioned, agree sex should most ideally be saved for marriage or a very serious relationship heading towards marriage. But most modern people don't share those views. The society and culture and the economy, they've just radically changed to such an extent. Teens need honest, accurate education on birth control, disease prevention, and healthy relationships, plus funding for all that too, not worst-case scenario fear-mongering. Number 6, likewise, the false representation of eating disorders in Kim, Empty Inside, which I have not read yet, apart from the first 10 or so pages preview on Amazon, is also damaging to teens with anorexia and bulimia. Real eating disorders aren't easily cured through finding God and brief stays in hospital. I mean, I do agree with Dr. Fraud to some extent, being religious or praying or whatever. It can help you if you're already inclined that way, or you're getting a religious conversion, but that is no substitute at all for, actual medical treatment or psychological therapy. That she was just so completely out of touch, and I'm really looking forward to ripping the Kim book apart when I can get my hands on a copy for what I consider a reasonable price. I'm not going to pay through the rough for that old crank's writing, but just the preview looked bad already. The all caps, older twin sisters named Dara and Lara. The sonograms existed. Women in these the last few decades, they know they're having twins ahead of time. It's not, oh, wow, that's a surprise. Oh, a second baby. I guess we should just give it a rhyming name because we had no time during the last 9 months to think of names. And there's a boy, Kim's age, named Dick. Like, how many Richards do you know, like, under the age of 80, I guess, at this point, who go by Dick? Like, that was just so goofy. I can't wait to rip that book apart. Number 7. She made no attempt to create different voices in each new book. While most writers maintain the same voice, style, and personal touches across all of their books, I do myself, those writers aren't producing supposed real-life journals. We're actually writing, fiction where that kind of thing makes sense. But, even when we're doing different characters here, we might have the same general style and voice and such, but we make each character sound different, even when we're not writing in the first person, and even when we're not writing the same characters in a series. We're doing different fictional universes and stuff. Everyone sounds exactly the same, which just is a huge amateurish no-no for any writer. Even the 14 runaways she interviews and voices sound exactly like all her other characters, and that's one of her other few books, which I have not yet had the misfortune of reading. I really hope I can find a copy for, again, a reasonable price. That one seems to be the most difficult to find and the, I guess, fairly most high price because it was a total bomb when it released in 78. I guess she learned her lesson and went back to writing fake journals instead of trying to do, oh, this is a 4 long monologue interviews. But it's not really an interview because I'm not talking. They're the only ones talking. They're just repeating back the line I just said, which she was a terrible writer. Number 8, her vilest act of all was turning Alden Barrett's journal into a made-up, bizarre story of a satanic cult, and then sitting back and gleefully keeping a scrapbook of his family's ruination after everyone figured out who the book was about. She couldn't even be arsed to change identifying details, and I was horrified when Mr. Emerson talks about this later in the book. He's going through her papers at YBU. Yes, I'm saying YBU on purpose instead of BYU, because think of what that says. YBU, because of their strict, rigid dress code and behavioral code and all that, crap. There, amid the scraps of commerce and myth, is a stash of news clippings about the fallout in Pleasant Grove. As the Barretts found themselves besieged, slowly coming apart in a cauldron of public shame, Sparks observed it all with an artist's care, clipping and filing the snapshots of another family's destruction. What a terrible person. This is something more than wrong. It outstrips squishy labels like troubling and problematic. Even sinister feels inadequate. That Beatrice Sparks, whose own family imploded after her parents' divorce and whose own first child died in infancy, betrayed the Barretts is vile enough. That she tracked their suffering and actually kept souvenirs is ugly beyond measure and carries the unmistakable stench of a crawl space. Oh, what a disgusting excuse for a person. Number 9, as I mentioned earlier, she made up every single doctor who endorsed her books, including a book that was in a work in progress at the time of her death. It already had reading endorsements from two fake doctors. As Mr. Emerson points out, it's also really sketchy how all of these doctors have stereotypically Jewish names. Did Dr. Fraud ever meet any actual Jews out there in the heart of the Morador? She already demonstrated ignorance of Jewish beliefs in Go Ask Alice, which I went over in that recent video. Number 10, she pretended to be a PhD and have a clinical adolescent psych practice, and all these interviewers and editors and agents and literary critics and such took her at her word. That's kind of a crime in a lot of states, particularly Utah, where she was living at the time. Her fraudulent ass should have been in jail. Number 11, she began making up academic and publishing credentials, plus fake quotes of praise when she started freelancing in the 1940s. No one ever bothered to check any of these claims. Number 12, she bought her way into a vanity-published poetry anthology and supplied her own bio, which she then quoted in several other publications. I'll read that from the Unmasked Alice as well. And since no paper wanted to look like a shoestring operation, she wrote under multiple pen names, contributing several pieces per issue. Well, that's not sketchy at all. She was B. Sparks and Busy Bee, and sometimes merging her daughter's and husband's name, Susan Love Vaughan. This sock puppet staffing left some curious traces, things that wouldn't stand out until many years later. When Sparks began freelancing for the California Intermountain News in the late 1940s, the paper profiled her early achievements, including a few that hadn't really happened, surprise, surprise, lying already. When she reached high school and college, University of Utah, she majored in philosophy and psychology. She was still writing poetry and was considered talented and promising enough to appear in an anthology of American poetry as a promising and talented young American poetress. Like, the word poetess is so, outdated. Sparks, the paper concluded, was an unusually versatile and talented writer. They didn't know the half of it. The article's facts all came from a single source, the Malibu Monitor, another paper where Sparks wrote under various pen names. The poetry claim was, to put it charitably, misleading. Two of Sparks's poems, Susie and Sunny, appeared in Of America We Sing, a patriotic anthology of poems and lyrics. That's not my style at all. Published by Exposition Press. Exposition was a vanity publisher and made its money by selling page space to authors, often at outlandish prices. In other words, Sparks bought her way into the anthology and supplied her own bio, which began, Beatrice Matthews Sparks attended Utah State Agricultural College. She could not keep track of which school she attended. So here, in this single example, is one newspaper article, possibly written by Sparks, largely recycling an earlier article, probably written by Sparks, with both articles citing an anthology bio, definitely written by Sparks. For added measure, she's described as a student of two separate colleges, neither of which has any record of her enrollment. It all went unnoticed, and understandably so. Nobody bought the Intermountain News for hard-hitting journalism, and who was going to push back about a college degree, much less an obscure poetry book? Number 13. She couldn't keep her stories straight about which schools she attended, what her degrees were, how she found Alice's journal, how she met Alice, when Alice died, or what her psych practice was like, and many other things she was claiming. Oh, I went to these 5 different schools. I went to Columbia and YBU and UCLA and Utah, University of Utah and Utah State Agricultural College and all these schools that have absolutely no record of her attending. And she only attended YBU for 5 months in 1989. People should have been checking this even before the internet. There was no excuse for people to just, oh, okay, you're a PhD and you attended these 5 schools and you collected all these awesome advanced degrees. I'm not going to check up on that at all. I'm just going to take you at your word. That's taking anyone at his or her word for a very serious claim like that. It's not pretending, oh, my mother is, has a certain job to impress the kids on the block, or my mother has a name that's popular now instead of her ugly old-fashioned old lady name I'm embarrassed about, or just, oh, my older sister, that's my older sister, and it's not really my older sister. The kind of lies children or preteens tell because, they just want more glamorous lives, or they want to be more popular or something like that. But this is serious, claiming you have all these degrees and no one is in fact checking anything. Just a horrible person. Number 14. She couldn't be arsed to do even basic research into anything she wrote about. Eating disorders, HIV/AIDS, rape, PTSD, Catholics, Southerners, drug use, welfare, teen moms, nothing. Number 15. This one's particularly personal for me. Sorry, not sorry. As someone who's never had a warm, close-knit, lovey-dovey relationship with my mother, and I cannot imagine that ever suddenly happening after so many decades of, radically different personalities and acrimony and stuff. It grinds my gears how all her characters are constantly declaring their wub for their precious, precious, precious mommies, who are the most dear, sweet, precious, perfect, darling, wise, loving, forgiving, angelic, saintly, holy mommies who ever mommied in the history of mommying in all of mommy kinsdom. Ugh. Teens are kind of famous for having difficult relationships with their parents. Something has gone wrong in one's attachment if one isn't pulling away from one's parents and seeking independence by adolescence. and it's just like it blows my mind. She would think, oh yeah, teens in the modern era, they can totally relate to supposed fellow teens who are all, oh, what a lovely, dovely, lovely, precious, darling mommykins I have. Oh, my mommy is so precious. I love crawling into mommy's bed when there's a thunderstorm and I'm 15 already, and I just love brushing mommy's hair and giving her back rubs. That's creepy, and I hate it. It's just like, I hate this trend of teens, well, all women in general, but like teens in particular, saying their mothers are their best friends. Do you not have a life outside of your family? It's, something has gone wrong in the attachment. Like I said, for example, God forbid, like a girl and her mother survived a traumatic experience together, and therefore they're, closely bonded, way more closely bonded than most other mothers, and daughters are just maybe like the mother is like a poor single mother working really hard, and so they have to really lean on one another, and particularly if the girl is parentified and has to help with taking care of the house and younger siblings. Yeah, I understand being a lot closer with the mother then, but if you're like a normal, she's portraying these girls, mostly girls in her books. She do have two male main characters there, like waspy suburban kids in the 90s, and the Alice and Jay in the 70s. They're not, like poor kids in Appalachia, or just survivors of trauma, or like urban or whatever, just people who, well they're suburban to, Summit up. They're like not the kind of characters you would expect to be lovey-dovey with their parents. I just can't say enough about how stupid and just unrealistic this is. Just, oh, she did not understand psychology at all. Like, find me one teen girl and living in the real world who has had, normal attachment and such, who is still declaring in her journal at 14, oh, what a precious darling mommy I have. Mommy kids for the win. My darling mommy. Oh, hanging out with mommy is so fun and cool. I don't like hanging out with teens. I'd rather hang out with a woman in her 40s or 50s. Mommy for the win. Gross. Number 16. Her most famous books launched two of the biggest moral panics of the late 20th century, the war on drugs and satanic panic, with awful consequences for so many innocent people. And Mr. Emerson, again, goes through this in quite some detail in his book, which, again, I highly recommend. And I do have the video in my playlist, Beatrice Sparks Was a Vile Fraud. That's the first video in the playlist. It's on my homepage on my YouTube profile. You just have to, do the arrow to the right to see it in the rest of the playlist, which I have on display. Number 17. Her anti-divorce attitude is morally offensive. Sadly, not all marriages are meant to last, and sometimes it's no one's fault, hence why we now have no-fault divorce laws. Instead of making women spend 6 weeks in Reno, a kind of legally sketchy single day in Mexico, which in many cases that really didn't fulfill the 100% legal requirements for a divorce recognized outside of Mexico, or necessitating stage scenes of adultery or abuse with convenient witnesses, or going up abroad to Europe if you had that kind of dough back in the day. If I'd made the huge mistake of marrying Sergei, I would have divorced him sooner rather than later. That's not me admitting a moral failing and sin. It's me being honest about how unhealthy and dead-end our relationship was, and that he's still not in a good place to marry or even date anyone. Number 18. She didn't even try to make her character sound even halfway modern, as I've said over and over again in these videos bashing her. They all sound like Molly Mormons and Peter priesthoods from her generation, or even earlier. Lou and It Happened to Nancy, the crappy boyfriend who comes along, or they knew one another earlier, but I guess they just weren't close yet. That's another big plot hole, how their relationship, why wasn't she dating him earlier if they apparently were so close already? But again, Dr. Fraud couldn't keep her plotline straight. So Lou, he sounds like a 70-year-old Mormon church official at their cult general conference. Oh, my uncles are fantastic father figures, financially, socially, spiritually, maturity wise, or that he says something similar to that one. What teen boy is talking like that? They sound like old Mormons. It's just so stupid. Number 19. She began writing herself in as an all-conquering, wise, miracle-working hero coming to the rescue. This self-praise is at its worst and most obnoxious and almost lost. The second of her 2 books with a male protagonist. I actually DNF'd that one when I tried reading it 7 or so years ago. It was really, really bad, even by her standards, it's like an alleged like case study again of a boy who didn't really exist. Oh, Sammy, he totally becomes a good little Peter Priesthood, no more drugs and gang banging and F words. Oh, and his parents have their marriage saved, and his dad gets off of the coke, and like all this like crap. It's just, she was so narcissistic and megalomaniacal. Just, oh, I hate her. Number 20. She gave her characters no lives outside of their issues. Who are their favorite actors, singers, writers, artists, for example? What do they think of current events? Like, do they not watch the news? Are they not aware of like, major stories that would have been going on in the 90s when these books were written? As a teen of the 90s, I think of so many things that could have been on their radar. You would have been like have to been living under a rock to not like know about or like think about or have an opinion on. What kinds of things are they learning in school? What books are they reading? Nothing. And Nancy mentions going to the movies a couple of times. Particularly, there's one goofy time where she and her friends, they start beating on one another like what when they're watching the movie because they're laughing or something. It's just freaking stupid. And then she wets herself when she's at the movies on her 16th birthday. But like, what movies are these? Like, wouldn't you mention the title if you're going out to the movies in your own journal? Did this woman not read like in her genre like actual real life published journals, particularly in the as close to the modern era as possible? Like she just did no research. I'm totally lost for words. What a crappy writer she was. So I'm going to cap this video in at just the first 20 items on my list of 30 like reasons I hate Beatrice Sparks. Look forward to the part 2 installment going through number 21 through number 30. I hope I'm entertaining you guys, even though it's this, a serious subject, and her lies had a lot of like disgusting, horrible consequences for innocent people. But when you really think about it, some of this stuff is just kind of like dark humor and unintentionally hilarious in a way. So thank you guys very much for watching. Please consider leaving a comment. What are your opinions on this fraud or literary fraud in general? And please consider subscribing if you haven't already. And I will see you guys in my next video, part 2 of the bashing of Beatrice Sparks, and for general reasons. Bye.